Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking Trees Live. I am your host, Katie Dubow, and we are so excited to be here with you today. We are joined in this series by arborists from all over the country answering the questions that you are asking. And today I'm excited to introduce my guest, Brad McBride from the Cleveland office. Hey, Brad.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am wonderful. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Pennsylvania. How about in Cleveland?
It is, and we're ready to talk some trees.
Yes, we're ready to talk trees. That's what we are here to do. And today's topic, we're going to be playing a little game show. Is my tree dead or simply dormant? I know a lot of you are asking, when will my tree leaf out? It's a big question that the arborists get as you're walking around outside. We are wondering, is this a normal time for my tree to be leafing out? Am I missing something? Or is it just normal for our trees that are in dormancy, which means they're asleep, right, Brad? Some of our trees, our deciduous trees, are just technically sleeping in the wintertime.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, that's a good way to phrase it. They are dormant. Many of them are waking up right now. Signs of spring are across the country. I'm in Ohio, you're in Pennsylvania, and I think we can both see signs of spring from the grass greening up to flowers popping to even leaves emerging now. And so you're wondering, how do you tell if a tree is live right now?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Don't tell me yet. We're going to get to that. Don't tell me.
okay.
Don't go there.
I'll hold that secret for now.
I'm looking at a beautiful forsythia right outside of my window, and that's one of those early signs. And so, like Brad said, it may feel like spring where some of you are. Where are some of you actually? Tell us. We told you where we are. Shoot a little chat in the comments and let us know if you're seeing sunshine like we are. Put a little sunshine emoji. Are you still getting cold, frost maybe, or even snow? Let us know that too. We want to know where you're tuning in from. So first, Brad, before you jumped in, I wanted to introduce you. So you are an Ohio resident and you've been with Davey for 14 years. Is that right?
Yeah, 2005.
Okay. Oh, longer.
Close
Great.
enough. Whatever. So a couple years were seasonal, but
and you really have a passion for understanding the benefits and of urban trees in particular. And when you and I were chatting before about these trees that leaf out, you really were honing in on some of our urban trees that are suffering. So we're going to get to that a little bit later, but you are, and urban trees can sometimes be the most important, but you are the expert here. And so if you guys out there have any questions about your trees, we're here today to talk about the specific topic of spring and when trees leaf out and what to do if they don't leaf out. So that's what we're going to talk about with Brad. But if you have any questions, now is your chance to ask the arborist. So ask your tree doctor. All right, Brad, now we can jump in. So tell us a little bit about the science behind when trees leaf out, maybe why they leaf out. Tell us a little bit of that history.
Well, I guess a little bit on the lines of spring and, realizing when trees are breaking dormancy and what to look for. Some trees flower first. Some trees may leaf out first. And we're talking mainly deciduous trees because those are the ones that are most obvious. They go dormant. They drop their leaves in the wintertime. To some people, they could be possibly dead. I mean, to a trained arborist, we're going to be able to tell the difference. But in general, what we're looking for is in the springtime that a bud opens. And it's usually towards the end of the branch first. And we're looking at the twigs, and then we look at the buds. And then from far away, you may see the flowers. From up close, you may notice something different. But if you're closely inspecting trees, whether it's a deciduous tree, a shrub, or even an evergreen, you can look towards the end of the branches and look at the buds and start to investigate those on, a close inspection and see if it appears to be live. I mean, from a further distance away, you'd probably notice the flowers and see that things are going well. But, it's not always that easy. I mean, things head in the right direction. And then in Ohio, we had some nasty weather last week, some very cold weather. It was an attitude adjustment for people and plants. And so things can take steps backwards. You might not be sure if your plant's injured or dead or it's vibrant. And so, that's where we come into play as arborists to be able to see what's going on, determine if the growth's healthy, if the development's normal, and if it's being affected by the weather.
So is the weather the number one thing that signals trees to bud out, or is it something they would do even if we didn't have all this sun?
Well, it is very largely weather related. I mean, no matter where you live, there are growing degree days that, without getting too technical into the science, accumulate, let's say, warmth into the plant, and it triggers a growth response at some point. Each plant's a little bit different, and this kind of plays into, cold hardiness for plants. Certain plants are more adapted to cold climates, and they typically have later bloom or emergent times. Other ones may not. And so all of that, it is factored into growing degree days. However, it's not always that simple either, because some plants can receive sun exposure that mimic the growing degree days and, say, warm up the trunk. And that's something, can affect young trees or thin bark trees. And it won't necessarily make the whole canopy emerge or buds emerge evenly across the whole canopy, like flowers at the ends of the branches or leaves at the end of the branches. What it'll do is it'll warm up the trunk of the tree, and it will start to cause cell division earlier than it should. And then if you get that late frost, or this can happen over winter time, to where the tree is fooled into thinking it's warmer earlier, and then it'll cause an injury to the trunk, and it's called sun scald. So that's just one thing that, as far as overall weather goes, it doesn't quite follow the rules. And so, that's one of the reasons why we always think about what is the right tree for the right place.
Yeah.
Is the tree we're putting in this location going to withstand that type of sun exposure? You could also think of it like you might have removed a very large tree on your property, and now the sun patterns have changed, and therefore you're exposing your trees to more direct sunlight. It could wake them up out of dormancy sooner, and it could it may cause a problem, it may not. But those are things to think about when you're thinking about the right place for the right tree and so forth.
That is so important. And I don't think we could talk about it enough. I want to talk about it a little bit later too. But as you are figuring out, listen to what Brad said, some of our trees that might not be in the right place, we might not have planted them correctly in the first place. So at the end, we'll get to what to do if you spot a problem. And there are a couple of things. We already have a question, Brad, from Guy. He's asking, if we do have a problem, can you scratch barely the surface of the bark to see if there's still green underneath, if maybe the buds or the flowers are not there?
Yes, you can. However, you may be able to accomplish that by not doing that. If you look at the twig itself, typically, if you had a dead twig and a live twig right next to each other, the live twig is going to be more glossy looking. It's going to be more lustrous. It might be flexible or pliable, and so therefore it might not break. And so if you're bending a twig and it's flexible, it's probably alive. If it snaps and you look at it, it's dry and crusty, then it's most likely dead. So yeah, you can do that, and I wouldn't say it's unnecessary injury. But another way to do that would be to actually prune it and just make a snip back a little further. And then once you prune that twig off there, then you can scrape it and look at it, because then, you've already done the job of cutting it off, and then you wouldn't be injuring the tree by doing that. And don't get me wrong, it's not a significant amount of injury. I'm just saying that there may be a better way to determine if it's live. And so, yeah, look at the twig, look at the bud, and that should help you. And if that doesn't help, then you can use a clean cutting tool and cut it open, or cut a twig off.
Great question, Guy. Whatever questions you guys have, please let us know in the chat and we'll get to them. So we talked a little bit you touched a little bit on sun scald and some other frost and some other issues. But because in Pennsylvania last May, like 3 weeks into May, we had a frost and it wiped out all of my fruit flowers, the flowers on my fruit trees. And my trees didn't flower. They didn't really perform. So is this common for most trees? Like if we get a late frost, is that really a big deal? Or what are some things that could affect trees here as we're moving into spring? We're coming into April, May, warmer weather. What are some things we should be on the lookout for in terms of weather?
It could. And like in your case that you're talking about with the fruit trees, having a frost kill the blooms is going to change the outcome of the tree, because it may be desirable to get fruit out of it. And so in that case right there, you're going to definitely reduce the amount of fruit you're going to get this year, potentially not have any. But typically when the flowers are iced, let's say, it doesn't affect the tree health as bad as, let's say, when the leaves are. And so, your fruit tree, it's going to be fine, most likely. I'm trying to think of other trees that bloom early. Like silver maples are typically very early flowering trees. Magnolias, magnolias, anybody that knows a magnolia, except for you southern folks out there, the Texas, Florida people, you may not be able to relate to this as much, but I know you do get frosts, and you probably have different trees that can be affected by frost. But in Ohio and the Midwest, magnolia is one of the signs of spring. Very, very large, huge blossoms, but they oftentimes get iced. And so when they come out, everybody's excited. And then typically during that first week or two of flowering, a frost or a snow will come, and then it'll ruin the blooms, And so really all you do is you miss out on a season of good blooms. I mean, the magnolias typically aren't affected too much by that, losing their flowers. But other trees that produce leaves earlier, I'm trying to think, crab apples would be one of them. Purple leaf plums would be another. So some trees do get leaves, and who knows? I mean, we're in April, early April. We could still get frost into May. I mean, up until Memorial Day. So by that time, more trees will have leaves on them. So, you think about your maples, your oaks, hickories, all those trees produce flowers first. And in the same situation as if you get a frost, it's probably going to limit the amount of fruit those trees produce. Yeah. Seeds, acorns, hickory nuts, stuff like that. But those trees also can recover. And so, even if we get that later frost and let's say your oak tree gets a damaging frost and the new leaves that just came out are wilted and curled over, it might look bad at first, and it may affect your tree if your tree has other problems, other stress problems, like if it's planted in the wrong location, if it has poor soil, root damage from the new driveway that was put in, stuff like that. That could affect it worse. But if your tree's healthy and you're doing all the things that you should be doing to care for it, properly mulching it, giving it the space it needs to grow to mature size, the right sun exposure, the moisture, you're routinely fertilizing it, you're pruning it properly, all these things. If you're doing all these things and you're taking care of your tree properly, a frost probably won't hurt it as bad, but it may aesthetically damage it. And so you might want to take care of that, and you might want to have it pruned. But oaks also, just for example, have early and late season growth. And so even though, this early season growth might be affected, the main goal for this growing season is that the oaks, or whatever tree we're talking about, can put on some growth and harden off a new bud for next year's growth. And so, like I said, as long as we're taking care of our trees properly, we're doing all the things we need to do to take care of them, that they should be able to withstand an early frost, put on some later season growth, still produce, some twig elongation, still produce some good sizable leaves, harden off a nice bud, and be healthy again for next year. So that's why it's very important to emphasize all the other aspects of tree care that go in hand with the environmental issues that are out of our control. I mean, there's really nothing we can do about it, so that's why we need to do everything else we can to keep the trees healthy. Yeah,
that is such a good point. And I'm hearing myself. See if that stops. Okay, it stopped. And I love that you're talking continually what Brad is saying about the right tree. And if you do have that right tree in the right place, then it probably, or you're continually having your arborist come out and check your trees. Maybe you don't have the diseases or the pests, which then will further weaken your tree. So Alyssa's asking Brad, has a newly planted dogwood and it hasn't bloomed yet. So we know dogwoods, Alyssa, I think you might be in Ohio. You have, I don't know when the typical, I would say they'll probably start to be blooming around now till the end of May. If it hasn't bloomed by the end of the month, does that mean it's dead? Or should she be more patient?
Be patient, because dogwoods are always after crab apples. So let's put it that way, I guess. So watch your crab apples and see when that happens. And, that's probably when you should expect, they're actually a little bit later in the spring for flowering. And so what you would want to do, though, is look at the buds themselves. If it's a native flowering dogwood, they should have big, globe-shaped buds at the end. And if they're looking healthy and shiny and not, I guess, as opposed to shriveled and wilted looking, then they're most likely viable buds. I guess also just to point out that when you have newly planted trees, it's also, I guess it's important to look at the soil itself and make sure that it was planted in a good location, that it wasn't buried too deeply, or that, the twine was removed, that the wire basket was taken down. and that the tree was installed as best it could, because just like everything else we've discussed, you want to do as much as you can to put the tree in the right position to succeed. And then we just, see what happens with the weather, basically.
Yeah. So Alyssa, if Alyssa has buds, now this is not a dogwood bud, I just grabbed this, but if she has something that looks like this, then you're saying she should be fine. Obviously, this is even further out, but if she's seeing these little buds, which here are the end of the branch, she should be fine.
Yeah, they're most likely not opening up yet, but yeah, I would say so. If the buds look viable and the twig is flexible, there should be no reason that it won't emerge this year.
Okay. We have a similar question from Courtney about a maple tree. It's not a newly planted tree, but this time last year, this is a great question. It had leaves. So we are looking at the same time of year, but this year it doesn't yet. So is that an indicator of an issue, or is that just another weather related thing?
Yeah, actually it is an indicator of an issue. Without being there to be sure of it, how do you tell what's normal? It's tough to say, but if you look around and like she says here, looking around at the other maple trees, they seem okay. Now, the only thing I would say is this. One is that you're saying they're older. The older maples are fine. So they may be more established. They could also be a different variety. So I'm not so sure if they're silver maples versus red maples. And they're also hybrid maples. And so if the new tree is a different species, or if it was potentially bred from different genetics, different genetics can affect a tree's emergence, like when the leaves come out and stuff like that. And so if you're certain it's the same type of maple and it's not emerging like the other same types of maples on the same property with the same type of sun exposure, same soil, same watering, all this type of stuff, if everything's similar, but you're seeing a difference between one tree and another, there could be a problem. And so without being certain, that's definitely a way to determine what's normal and what's not, is by looking around, look across the street, look down the street, to see other people that have similar trees and see if they're doing the same thing your tree is.
Well, that makes me wonder, would it be like if I had a maple that was in full sun and then a maple that got shade, could that be a difference, or is that little bit of
Definitely
difference in sun? Okay. So even in my same yard.
And that would factor into whether or not it's the same, so you're right. I mean, the same property is not the same. Like if it's on one side of the house or the other side of the house, the sun exposure will be different. And I'm sure the thing about trees is they're so large and imposing that it's tough to tell exactly what's going on or remember. But you could use your other examples in the landscape, because other plants also use growing degree days and stuff like that. And like you may have spring bulbs that emerge on one side of the driveway before the other, or, stuff like that, where it's very similar to trees, and, they may get a different, like, let's call it different microclimate on the same property.
That is a great point. Now we got another really important question. Cooper wants to know what your favorite tree is.
That is a good question, Cooper. Well, I would have to say my favorite tree is a black gum, a Nyssa sylvatica. Very nice fall color, not very prone to disease. It doesn't have a flower, but I'm a type of guy that enjoys one tree as my favorite for some time, and then I find another tree that I like to enjoy. A flowering dogwood is also a great tree. I'll go there too, because it's known to be a 4-season tree. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is in the springtime, it gets flowers. In the summer, it has very nice foliage. In the fall, it has fall color and some fruit. And in the winter, it has interesting form with nice looking bark and nice branching structure and stuff like that. So, I mean, a flowering dogwood is a pretty good choice as well. So it's tough to say, but, it depends on what day you ask me. I may come up with a different answer each time.
Funny, my arborist here in Pennsylvania, he says one of his favorite trees is a black gum as well. Jason Gaskill out there. All right, well, that was fun. I had to ask that one. Okay, so you already mentioned sun scald, but we talked about the buds now you mentioned a word swelling to me before. So if you're looking at your tree and you see those buds over time starting to get bigger, I assume that's what you mean by swelling, right?
Yeah.
Now, if they're not doing that, maybe a sign of a problem. What are some other signs at this point where maybe our tree doesn't have leaves yet? What are some other signs that there might be a possible problem? What does sun scald actually look like?
Sun scald looks like I mean, if anyone's ever seen like a buck rub a tree to where the trunk looks tattered, like if you see an injury on a trunk and you're like, what did this? It's usually a mechanical damage from someone running a mower into it, or
Yes.
a weed whacker, even a car or anything like that. To like just typical vandal damage, that type of stuff. A deer can scrape the trunk, but sun scald is usually found on the southwest side of the tree. So if you see a tree with sun damage on it and you're like, where's southwest? That's typically, if the direction the trunk is facing southwest, that's where it gets the most, like, I guess, high intensity sun exposure in the afternoons, and it heats that trunk up. And, I have a black gum at the house I live at. It was planted on the street and it did get sun scald. And so if you have that, basically you just need to trace the wound, remove the loose and dead like tissue, and then it will heal slowly. And so this tree I have, it took 5 or 6 years, but it closed the wound completely this year. And so if you're doing all the other things, fertilizing, you're taking care of that wound, a tree that has a big trunk wound on it and it's young, it should be able to recover. And sun scald doesn't happen to older trees that have thick bark. But like a beech tree, for example, it has thin bark even when it's older. If you were to do like a very aggressive pruning to a beech tree and expose the trunk, then it could get sun scald as well. So it's not just for young trees, but most commonly for young trees. And then and you look on the southwest side. And the thing about being an arborist is trees can't talk. And so we don't know exactly what's going on. We just have to use our best judgment, collect information like we're a detective, and try to figure out what could have possibly happened here, and then rule it out. But the thing is just like anything else, is it oftentimes comes down to the core recommendations on how to take care of plants. Routine fertilization, making sure the soil's in good shape, and then it's the right tree for the right place, given the sun exposure, the wetness, and the space and all that.
Well, that was just going to be my next question, but I have to say then you speak for the trees. We all love that book. So arborists speak for the trees because they cannot speak for themselves. Guy is asking, what's the best protection against sun scald? So he suggests either white paint or wrapping. So if you know that you've pruned your beech or, a younger tree, what can you do?
Yeah, I know white paint is very common in Texas, and I can't in southern states. I can't speak to whether or not that's industry standard. I do know that the white trunk wraps are very common, and so I could most likely say that's okay. You just want to be careful if you're using those wraps that it doesn't trap excessive moisture against the trunk, or that maybe you change it or adjust it every so often, and don't just leave it for granted and just leave it there for 5 years. So whether you just go and spin it or lift it or adjust it somehow, I mean it's most likely to be okay.
Yeah. So the best protection, so you're saying that, okay, we talked about the things to do to prevent this from happening: fertilizing, mulching, and Brad, you don't have the benefit of being on the show like I do every week. I am a big anti-volcano mulcher. So if you haven't heard, volcano mulching is bad. So yes. If you are mulching, would you just give people a quick, spiel on how to apply proper mulch?
Yeah, exactly. And so kind of relating back to what you were wondering earlier is like, how would you know if something's wrong? Well, let's say you go out to your tree and you suspect there is something wrong. And you're like, I'm not sure if this tree is alive or not, or if it's doing well, or if it's, so on that topic is basically you could look at the mulch. That's one thing you want to look at is, okay, is my tree doing well? Look at the mulch itself. Look at the tree trunk itself. If the tree trunk looks like a pencil stuck in the ground like that, then it's not properly installed. You want to see a flare at the base, you want to make sure that the tree was installed properly to grade. So if it's a young tree, maybe something you can correct as far as the depth it was planted. If it's an older tree, you look at it, maybe it was planted at the proper depth, but over time the mulch just kept getting piled up over the trunk, and it created the illusion of this tree being planted too deep, and you just see this stick in the mud. So that's one thing that will affect the tree health. For one, because it'll cause excessive moisture, potentially rot to the trunk. It also encourages root development above the root flare, which will develop thicker, and as trees expand radially, the roots don't let up, and it girdles it, and it kind of chokes it off. So, that usually results in lower vigor, which could be a problem when you have weather, like extreme weather events.
Yep.
It could create an actual physical problem that weakens the trunk. It constricts the base of it and then causes it likely to fail at some point in the future. So not only do trees just like being mulched properly, so you don't want to have mulch against the trunk of the tree. You want to excavate until you start to see a flare. It may not be possible. This may be something that you have to do over time, or you might need to work with Davey Tree that uses a tool called an air spade that can blow away soil and mulch from the trunk and the roots without injuring. Because if you go in there with a rake or a shovel and start digging away mulch and dirt, then you may start injuring the tree trunk or the roots, and then you could potentially cause more problem. So it needs to be done carefully. Young trees are easier to work with because there's not as many roots, So proper mulching, because why? Because that could be one of the keys to why is my tree not healthy. Yep. And so you look there is one thing you'd want to do, and then you want to make sure it's done properly. And if it's not been done properly for quite some time, well, maybe this is the year you start to address that problem and work towards. Maybe you don't do more mulch this year. Maybe you renovate your mulch or cultivate it, or even take some away.
Mm-hmm. Those are all such great tips, because as you have heard Brad repeat throughout this episode, is that yes, your tree might get a late frost. Your tree, if it's budding out, that's a good sign. It will eventually have leaves. If we get a late frost and it has leaves, if you've been maintaining your tree properly, and first you planted it in the right place, in the right way, it should probably survive. We can't say every tree will survive, but those are all the really important things that you talked about, Brad, that really get our trees through and over these humps of maybe a late frost or something that would happen to them. But is there anything that we can do to protect them besides, so we've talked about the proper fertilization, proper care. Would you say, I've seen people like wrapping their trees in black plastic if a late frost is predicted? No, don't do that. Is there anything
like if you were, let's say this, like if you were in the fruit industry and you want to make sure you protected your fruit blossoms, then you might want to do something. Like you could, people spray water to protect the buds and stuff like that. Think about this. Now, not only frost are we talking about as far as what, early weather can affect a tree, but think about ice and snow and stuff that actually weighs the trunk down. So as far as protecting the tree, I would say just make sure it's pruned properly. Wintertime, and as we're coming out of wintertime, it may be, who knows? We're talking about something we could have done already. We can still do now, but supporting your trees. So looking at the tree structure, like a flowering pear tree is an example of a tree that has poor structure and that they could be supported. So although that tree may be affected by a late frost, it could also be affected by a late ice or snow that in combination with the blooms or the leaves that came out, the snow and the ice start hitting it, weigh it down, then you get some wind. That could cause some structural failure of a tree. And so looking at your tree to make sure that it's pruned properly so you get good airflow through it, the branches are spaced, that you have support cables in the trees, or that you remove branches that are likely to fail so that they don't rip in half and tear on your tree and then cause an injury that's hard for the tree to heal. So, all this ties into whether the tree's healthy and taken care of properly. So another thing you can do when you're looking at your trees right now, if you're inspecting them and you're looking at your buds, is look at the tip of the branch and then look at the twig, and you'll be able to see how much growth it had on the previous season by looking at the twig. And if you follow the twig back, you'll see a ring around it. It's called a stipule scar. And you might see that this past year it grew 4 to 6 inches, and then the previous year it grew 18. And so those will give you keys. If you look at the twig, you can follow it back in time and start to see how much growth did my tree put on this past year, and start to determine whether or not your tree's vigorous. And you could do that by comparing other trees. Let's say you have trees along your street and you're wondering if the one in front of your house is healthy. You can look at the twig and see how much growth it's putting on, and then look at another one across the street or down the street and see if it's putting on the same type of growth. And let's say yours isn't. That might indicate a root problem or a fertility problem or a soil problem. And so those types of keys, like for looking at the buds, the twigs, the mulching, how much growth it's putting on, whether it's pruned properly and supported, those are definitely keys coming out of wintertime to make sure your tree's healthy, on top of the fertilizing and, pest management and stuff as well.
I love that. And everyone, Jennifer is saying that's such a cool idea, like measuring her kid's height each year. That
It
is
is
so
true.
true. I never really thought, and now is the best time to do it because it's warm out. It's not winter and it's warmish. You can go out, there's no leaves on the tree. So it's the perfect time to go out and just assess. Maybe now we're not looking, we do have those buds. So your tree is alive and not dead, but is it the healthiest that it can be? So analyze
Exactly.
its growth year over year. That is such a fun project for all ages.
Yeah.
So thanks for that tip.
Yeah.
That's a
Look up
really
stipule scars on Google and you will see what one looks like. But essentially, it's a ring around the tree. All that is it's showing where the previous year's bud opened up and then the twig took off from there,
very cool. So interesting. So do you recommend, like, I know a lot of us here in Pennsylvania, Ohio, we wouldn't get a snow likely when the trees have leafed out, but maybe out in Colorado they would. Are you do we recommend shaking the snow off the
it wouldn't
heavy
hurt.
wet?
Yeah. I mean, we do that to shrubs all the time. I mean, you got to be careful. I mean, because you could obviously injure it, but yeah, it doesn't hurt to take the snow off trees whenever possible, if that
Okay.
is a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
especially when they have leaves. In the dormant season might not be such a big deal, but the leaves will weigh those branches down.
exactly.
One more question. What if your trees start to get their leaves in spring, but then they start to lose the ones they are growing? That seems like a big problem.
I would say that you just want to double check to make sure they actually are leaves and then they're not flower petals. Because
Oh,
sometimes, you might look and think you're seeing leaves on the ground, but they potentially could be flower petals or even buds that open up. So just take a look at it, and if they are losing leaves, it's possible that it is related to that cold weather, especially if you're in Ohio or anywhere else that got that cold weather that we had a week or so ago. But then, if you lost leaves, what you want to do is look further down the twig, make sure see if there's a viable bud or not, and really a lot of times what we tell people is we're looking for progress. So even though your tree might have had a setback, we hope to reverse. There's trends. You either see a trend of decline or a trend of a positive response. And so that's what we'd be looking for next is my tree getting worse or getting better? And then have an arborist out to take a look.
that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And we've already talked about what to do, once your trees bloom and all year round. The tips that Brad has given us for tree health care is not just in the spring. You want to make sure that your trees are well taken care of in the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter. I mean, dormant pruning is one of the best times to prune our trees. So it is really a year-round care for our trees because they give us so much back. So,
Yep.
Brad, if we have no other questions from you guys out there in Facebook land, you have been so helpful to us. This has been so much information. I'm going to go out and start to look at my stipple scars.
Yeah. Measure that annual growth and see how your tree's doing.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us
You're welcome.
today. It has been
Been a
really,
pleasure.
really helpful.
All
So
right. Bye, everybody.
we will be back. Brad's not going to be back in 2 weeks, but on April 21st, I will be back with Alex Julius. We're going to be talking about climbing trees and do a little fun Arbor Day history lesson. So if you don't know about Arbor Day, Brad, you should tune back in on April 21st, but I'm guessing you know all about it.
Yeah.
And, we've got so much helpful information from Davey. There's a podcast, there's a blog. So please follow us on Facebook to make sure that you don't miss anything. And if you're interested in having an arborist out, like Brad, if you live in Cleveland or one of our other great arborists, please, we will post the link to find our office in the chat and you can contact us. But for now, we'll say goodbye and thank you again, Brad.
Yep.
Take
Thanks for
care.
having me. All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye.